Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Nat. Okay, time for our second speaker, straight into it. It's Anna, who I've known for, again, many, many years. In fact, Anna used to be an intern at Clear Left, the company where I work. Gosh, how many years ago now? Many years ago, fresh out of school. Since then, she's gone on to do all sorts of great things. You've probably seen her website, maben.co.uk. You'll almost certainly have seen her website, styleguides.io, where she collects resources all about style guides and pattern libraries. But today, she's not here to talk about that. Today, she's going to talk about some of the devices and browsers that maybe slip through the cracks that we don't think about. So to tell us all about those edge cases, Anna Debenham.
So I'm going to start with a short story that doesn't have anything to do with console browsers. So a man named Sam Farber, he noticed that his wife Betsy was struggling to use a conventional vegetable peeler to peel apples, and she had arthritis. So Sam set about designing one that she could use, and the new design had soft plastic handles, and in creating one that was easier for someone with arthritis to use, he in turn made one that able-bodied people also found more comfortable to use. You might even have one at home. It's called the OXO Good Grips Peeler. OXO have a phrase for this. They refer to it as universal design. And here's what they have to say about it. So they say, universal design does not mean designing products fully usable by everybody, since there is no product that can truly fulfill the needs of all users. But when all users' needs are taken into consideration in the initial design process, the result is a product that can be used by the broadest spectrum of users. And they also say that in the case of OXO, it means designing products for young and old, male and female, left and right-handed, and many with special needs. So I want you to think about this story while I talk about console browsers. So although my talk is about console browsers, they're really a metaphor for all the unusual devices out there with screens. And there are so many that most of us don't even consider, like cameras. There are loads that have browsers now, and bespoke child-friendly browsers on tablets built for kids. There's the Samsung Gear S smartwatch, which runs Opera Mini, and you can even find browsers on printers now. Basically, anywhere that you can stick a screen, eventually, there will be a browser. Literally anywhere. So on the left, Jason is browsing the web on his exercise machine. And on the right, Anand is washing his hands with a web-enabled tap. So these are the three forms of input we typically consider at the moment when we build websites. And we tend to pigeonhole devices like this, but it's just not a sustainable model. Because there are so many in-betweens and outliers, and Cameron Moore calls these pigeonholes device silos. And they just don't hold up anymore, because we've got mobile phones with resolutions larger than some desktop screens, we've got touch-enabled laptops, and tablets the size of tables. These don't fit into our model. But that's okay, because once we break away from the silo mentality, we realize just how many different types of devices that there are. So let's look at some stats. TV game consoles are used for lots of things, not just gaming. So Ofcom do research into media habits, and they found that internationally, 14% use it specifically for web browsing. And a lot of people use their console's internet capabilities to watch video in various formats. So think about the context of using your phone as opposed to your TV. So the TV is often in a communal environment. Groups of people sit around and watch it. And that's why video is so popular on these devices. It's a shared experience, and you'll see later on how some of these devices are taking advantage of that. People who use console browsers are likely to be young. So 26% of 16 to 24-year-olds in the UK visit websites on a console. In households that own a PC, a console may be a convenient extra way to browse the internet if there's competition for the more conventional device. Ofcom will also report that lower income households are more likely to have a console than a computer. So this may be the only way that some people can get online. As we've just seen, console browsers are really popular with young people. So don't dismiss these browsers just because you don't use them and can't imagine why someone else would. We've made that mistake before with phone browsers. Sites like gov.uk, like we've just seen, really have to consider this stuff because with everything going digital, it's so important that people can do things like complete a student loan application using whatever device they have available. The game console market is shifting in response to the threat from the smartphone and tablet gaming market. And web technology is becoming increasingly relevant in the games industry. So Nintendo have the Web Framework, which is a development environment based on WebKit, which works with their new console. And it means you can use HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS to make games and apps. And the framework gives you access to the Wii U gamepad controls and features like the camera and accelerometer that it has. Likewise, game controllers can be plugged into the computer and interact with a browser using the Gamepad API. And this works in Edge, Firefox, Chrome, and Opera to be supported by Safari, hopefully before we all retire. In case you're not a gamer, here's a quick introduction to a generic game controller. And this is the PlayStation's one, but they're all very similar. So analog sticks are basically mini joysticks. Some controllers let you push the stick in as an extra button. The D-pad is like the arrow keys on your keyboard. And there are usually 4 triggers on the back of a TV console controller, but the portable ones usually only have 2. Browsers have been in consoles for almost 20 years. So in 1997, the same year that brought us Final Fantasy VII, the Teletubbies, and Tony Blair, a portable device came out called the Game.com, and it was the first console to have a web browser. So I'm not going to have time to show you all the consoles I've tested, so let's jump forward to 2005, the year that brought us YouTube, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, and Tony Blair's third term. It also brought us the Xbox 360. It only got a browser relatively recently, but it's an IE9 browser, and it scores 24% on the HTML5 test and 33% on the CSS3 test. Most of the buttons on the controller you used, you can use the analog stick to pan, and there's something called Smart Zoom that lets you zoom in wherever the cursor is. The Xbox's browser has 2 user agent strings. So the second one is when it's pretending to be a mobile phone. So to switch between the 2 strings, you check this box on the browser settings to make the console pretend it's a phone. And if sites have a mobile version, they display like this. And I think they've added this as an option because mobile interfaces are generally easier to use on a TV than traditional desktop interfaces. And what this tells me is that we need to turn our attention to making websites just as easy to use on any device as we would for a mobile phone. Also, we can't rely on user agent strings to tell us what something is because they lie all the time. So onto the newer consoles, the 3DS XL scores 14% on the HTML5 test and 30% on the CSS3 test. The device also has a stylus and 3 cameras, so it has 2 on the back for taking 3D pictures and video, and 1 camera on the front. Special glasses aren't needed to view in 3D, but the device does have to be held at just the right angle and distance. And only the top screen is 3D, and it's wider than the bottom one, which is a 2D resistive touchscreen. You might be getting excited about the thought of using a 3D device to browse the internet, but unfortunately 3D capabilities aren't enabled for the browser. You can, however, view 3D images, but not within the page in the browser. You have to download the image first in order to see it. The format is .mpo. These are a combination of 2 JPEG images on top of each other, and the fallback is a single JPEG. So onto the Wii U, which is my favorite console browser. It scores 56% in the HTML5 test and 41% in the CSS3 test. And a lot of HTML5 features are not available on console browsers due to the difference in available memory and storage, but this browser actually does pretty well. So the gamepad has a lot of browser controls, and I counted 4 different ways to zoom. Zooming is really important on a TV console. Most websites have been designed for TVs and haven't been designed for TVs, and the text is just really small when you're sitting far away from the screen. So that's why they've put in so many ways to zoom. And the device also has a wealth of detectors, including 9-axis control, and there's also a camera on the front. The Wii U's gamepad has a nice big screen and stylus. You can use your fingers to use it, but you have to press quite hard, and it's a very different experience to using a tablet. So notice that the resolution on the gamepad is low compared to a tablet, which is the same with all Nintendo's devices. It means that they can sell them for cheaper than a tablet. Nintendo's browser team have the advantage of higher specs to play with in their console compared to the older devices. So they've got 1 GB of memory dedicated to games and 1 GB dedicated to the system. And that makes it easier for them to support the latest standards. Consoles aren't just for games now, they're being marketed as complete entertainment solutions. So in Nintendo's case, internet connectivity and browser functionality have gone from a nice-to-have feature in game consoles to a selling point. And this is a really interesting interview with the team behind the browser, so it's well worth a read. They even see it as a challenge to design an experience that's better than browsing on a desktop. They want people to find browsing fun with features like you can hide what's on the gamepad from the TV by pressing a button that draws some curtains on the screen, and you can interact with it and you can go to a new page, and then when you're ready, you press a button to open the curtains and reveal what's on the screen. Looking at the other latest consoles, the Xbox One has made some big improvements to its browser since it came out. So it used to run IE10, but it now runs the Edge browser, which scores a whopping 77% in the HTML5 test and 47% in the CSS3 test. This is the best, in terms of standards, this is the best console browser, and well done. I'm not just saying that because they're sponsoring, but yeah, pleased to hear that. So there's nothing really that exceptional about the controller. It works in a very similar way to the Xbox 360s. But one thing you can do is use the Kinect's voice and gesture to browse. The Xbox 360 also had a Kinect, but I think the newer one is a lot better. It's much better at voice as well. It recognises what I'm saying a lot more. And they also have Smart Glass, which is an app for Android, Windows Phone and iOS that lets you use your phone to control the Xbox. And they have apps for both the 360 and the Xbox One. And it's actually a really pleasant experience to use this with the browser. It's a lot easier to type URLs on your phone than it is using the controller. A feature I really like about the Xbox One is Snap Mode. So you can have 2 screens open up at the same time. And if you want, one of them can be the game and one of them can be the browser. So you can easily switch the 2 screens round to make one the main one. So you can be watching TV in the main screen and displaying tweets related to the TV show you're watching in the sidebar. Or you could be playing a game while displaying a walkthrough. So here I'm playing The Long Dark, which is a really quite difficult game. And I've got a browser window open with a map that someone has drawn because the game doesn't have one. I guess I'm cheating a bit. So they're making it easier for people to multitask by presenting information that people would normally look at on their phone while watching TV or playing a game. And it's not just big sites that need to consider console users. If someone is displaying their Twitter feed in that sidebar, they could click on a link that someone has tweeted and be sent to your site. 20 years after Nintendo came out with this, the Virtual Boy, which was a virtual reality headset, suddenly they're back in fashion with everyone from Microsoft to Sony working on one. So it might seem premature to start designing experiences for devices like these now, but if we don't, design conventions will already have formed by the time these become mainstream. And it's exciting because this is a device that doesn't have legacy conventions. And by starting early, we can help shape those design conventions. And if you don't think this is applicable to you, Mozilla have a VR team aiming to bring virtual reality to the web. I'm not convinced we'll be browsing the web on these devices anytime soon, but I'd like to think that the web will find a home here. Playing with all these console browsers has taught me a lot. So it feels like we've only just got to grips with mobile and tablets. But this is just a fraction of the web, and we need to start exploring more of the other devices out there, because it's only going to get weirder. So here's a potted summary of what I've learned from all this testing. Firstly, interaction is weird, but that's good, because by thinking about D-pads and keyboard input, voice and gesture, the sites I build are more accessible. I love console browsers because they make me think about how a site will work not just on a very small screen, but simultaneously on a very big screen. Basically, console browsers are a really good way to make sure my sites work in lots and lots of different situations. Secondly, the term that we currently use to describe technology, the terms are ambiguous. We've used the term mobile for years to mean a smartphone, but if we're talking about portability, we could include a lot of devices. The next thing I learned is that performance is critical. Sites are a lot slower to load because the amount of memory consoles can allocate to the browser is very limited. In fact, in one of the older DS models, you had to buy a separate memory cartridge in order to use the browser, and the memory cartridge wasn't used for any games, it was only used for that browser. So I got this error message frequently on the 3DS XL, which is a relatively new console. And it's not just consoles that have this problem, because I've seen this message on web TVs as well. So work hard to optimize your sites so that they can be accessed by more people. When it came to testing TV consoles, my assumption was that I could fit lots of columns into such a wide screen, but that's not the case. It doesn't take into account how far away you actually sit from the TV. And a large screen doesn't always mean better definition. So text will look a bit pixelated, and the colors will be optimized for watching video rather than for reading. So if you're designing with TV users in mind, Google have some guidelines that are great bits of advice for also when you're considering console users. Like using your mobile phone as a model for the UI to simulate the experience of sitting far away from a screen. Adding more blank space between elements to make clickable areas easier to hit, especially if you're using a gesture device. And leaving vertical space for content because other than phones, vertical space is a premium on widescreen TVs. Also provide highly obvious visual feedback on focus to make it clear what's happening on the screen. And they also note that unlike computers, users actually expect sound from a TV and they don't find it disruptive. Finally, the most important piece of advice I learned, which is summed up nicely in this quote from Cameron Moll, is that cross-screen design is web design. As people who work on the web, it's our job to think about stuff like this. Microsoft get it. They know how to design for multiple inputs because they built the Xbox. They don't need a completely different UI for each device. It works with any form of input. And that's where I think we should be focusing. When faced with this impossible range of devices, we need to strive to make our sites work for as many different contexts using the same interface as possible. That's universal design. And here's another example. So showing subtitles with video content is often seen as something that will exclusively benefit those who are deaf or hard of hearing. But Henny points out that 80% of people in the UK who use them, so that's 6 million viewers, are not. They might have them on because they're in a noisy room, or their first language isn't English, or the dialogue is just difficult to follow. It's like when you add a wheelchair ramp to a building. You make it accessible not just to wheelchair users, but also to people using pushchairs or hoverboards. Remember, we're not designing for devices, we're not designing for Android, for iPhone, for desktop. That's what software designers do. We're designing for the web with devices in mind. Don't design for console browsers, design for the web. Thank you very much for having me. If you're interested in learning more about this, you can go to console.maven.co.uk, which has a lot of stats, and it's got all of the console browsers that I've tested on there.